over to the United States for her adoption, her name changed to Hana Williams. Now, I will say that from research, it really was hard to find out what her life was like in Ethiopia prior to this adoption. But as you will come to learn, I think you will agree with me that it's hard to imagine that her life in Ethiopia could have been worse than what it came to be when she came over to the United States and was adopted by the Williams family. Larry and Carri already had 7 children of their own and wanted more. But the pregnancy of her 7th child left Carri Williams unable to have any more children of her own. Around this time in the mid-2000s, it had become a trend for homeschooling evangelical Christians to adopt children in need, even though they already had very large families. These families felt that it was a duty of their faith to rescue children that needed a good home, and then they would homeschool them according to a very conservative Christian curriculum. Other families that the Williams knew from their Bible study group had also adopted up to as many as 8 children into their lives and welcomed them into their families. So Carri and Larry felt that they could do the same. So for some background, Larry Williams worked from noon until midnight as a millwright for Boeing, while Carri stayed home to homeschool their children. Carri had attended a women's retreat run by a ministry called Above Rubies, and at that retreat they spoke of this trend of evangelicals adopting children, and many of these adoptions came from Liberia, which was a West African country experiencing political instability caused by multiple civil wars. In 2008, the Williamses contacted Adoption Advocates International, which the abbreviation for that is AAI, and this was a secular adoption agency based in Port Angeles, Washington. AAI was run by a woman by the name of Marilee Ripley, who had 20 children of her own. 3 of those children were biological and 17 were adopted. Marilee had informed Carri that there were 2 orphaned children in Ethiopia that desperately needed a loving home. One child was deaf, and fortunately, Carri had studied American Sign Language before getting married to Larry, so it seemed like a perfect match from Marilee's perspective. So, in order to prepare for the adoption, the Williamses went through a series of steps. And if you've ever known anybody that has adopted a child or has applied to become a foster parent, you will know that it is a pretty significant process, as it should be, given that you are taking in completely these children that are unknown to you. You are unknown to them. The state has to make sure that you are of sound mind, that you can take care of these children. And, however, the sad part about it is that, unfortunately, bad people somehow slip through the cracks. So, in order to prepare imagine, it was absolutely heart-wrenching. And they saw 7-year-old Emmanuel, who was deaf, and 11-year-old Hana, who was slightly underweight at only 77 pounds. Now, I guess I don't really know what a typical weight is for an 11-year-old, but I don't think 77 pounds is it. So, brother and sister Emmanuel and Hana had been living in the, and I don't know how to pronounce this, but it's the Gidani Merit Orphanage in the Ethiopian capital city of Addis Ababa. Both had been abandoned at a very early age, and they really actually weren't related, but I call them brother and sister because they were adoptive brother and sister, so they weren't actually related, but they were very excited that they would soon become officially brother and sister, living in the United States together with the same family. They learned that their new parents lived in the countryside of the Pacific Northwest, and this was very idyllic for them. They had heard really lovely things about the Pacific Northwest, and the Pacific Northwest really is a beautiful place to live, to visit. It's absolutely gorgeous, so I can only imagine that they were excited. And in preparation for their new exciting life, Hana read some books that would prepare her and give her some insight potentially to her new world, and one of those books was Little House on the Prairie. So in the months after Hana and Emmanuel's arrival in 2008, the Williams' post-adoption reports came to the AAI, which was a part of the adoption agreement. According to the adoption agency, everything in the reports seemed very normal, and Hana had filled out to a healthier 105 pounds, which was quite a significant weight gain, which was really good, showing that she was being nourished and becoming healthier. So in June of 2009, the reports suddenly stopped. And although the adoption agreement stated that Carri and Larry would continue to send these reports throughout the children's lives, they really weren't actually under any legal obligation to file the reports, which is weird because it was an adoption agreement, and I guess maybe I don't fully understand that process or how legally or not legally binding it is, but somehow they did not have to continue filing these reports, or nobody made a big deal of the fact that they didn't. And because of this, the adoption agency had no way of knowing the atrocities that were going on in the Williams household. So Larry and Carri Williams believed in a very strict, fundamentalist Christian lifestyle. In addition to homeschooling the kids, almost all television and internet access was completely prohibited. They believed women should never wear pants, only skirts or dresses, and never swimsuits, and they were absolutely not allowed to vote. The children were rarely seen in public, and they only socialized with a select few like-minded families. Larry regularly preached to the children in the backyard of their rural 5-acre property, and so they were very closed off from society. They lived in a very conservative, sheltered bubble away from the real world. Now, as for disciplining the children, feeding a child came straight from his interpretation of the Bible. He believed that Proverbs 13:24, a verse from the Bible, justified his beliefs. And that verse stated, "He that spareth his rod hateth his son." Pearl said, quote, "A child properly and timely spanked is healed in the soul and restored to wholeness of spirit. A child can be turned back from the road to hell through proper spankings." End quote. Now, this book went into great detail of specific implements and tactics for parents to use. It ranged from using a wooden spoon, a spatula, or the most popular weapon of choice, a short length of small plastic plumbing tubing. This was a particularly well-liked implement because it could be easily curled up and kept available in a parent's pocket at all times. This book also taught parents to withhold food and put children under a cold outdoor garden hose as punishment as needed. All of which is horrible. Absolutely terrible in my opinion. Not the way that you treat children. And I don't even think you should treat dogs that way. So, or any animal of that sort. You don't treat anything like that, in my opinion. This book was extremely popular with fundamentalist Christian homeschoolers, and according to the author, sold almost 700,000 copies in the first 7 years of its publication. The Pearls' family had the No Greater Joy Ministry, and it generated upwards of 1.7 million tax-free dollars per year. So after the adoption, for the next 2 years, Hana's hope of the American dream quickly washed away. Life with the Williams family was nothing like the Little House on the Prairie life that she had envisioned. All of these lovely dreams that she had quickly turned into absolute nightmares. Within months after Hana arriving in the United States, she began menstruating. And this infuriated Carri, who told members of her knitting group that she wanted to adopt a little girl, not a half-grown woman. She said that Hana was rebellious and told her knitting friends and church community members that she wouldn't wish her on anybody. Now, I am no expert, but if you are taking an 11-year-old little girl in your home, and yes, she's still a little girl, you have to know that her starting her period is coming, and it's not that far away. And that doesn't make her a half-grown woman. And it also just breaks my heart that she would say that she wouldn't wish her on anybody. And if I'm not mistaken, it is common for children that have been adopted to have some challenges and, really struggle to acclimate. So if I'm not mistaken, it's not uncommon for children who have been adopted to struggle to an extent, and sometimes they do have behavioral issues. And I would hope and expect that an adoption agency warns other families of these things, just as a potential situation they may walk through and may walk into. So again, with me sharing that, it makes me so mad that Carri would tell people that she wouldn't wish Hana on anyone. Friends and neighbors of the Williams family had noticed that occasion that they were brought to church with the family, one parishioner that knew sign language often attempted to sign with the manual, but Carri and Larry didn't want him communicating with anybody. I wonder why. One of them would quickly whisk him away before he had a chance to converse with anybody. Neighbors noticed the 7 children would be seen actively playing together at the front of the Williams home, while Hana and Emmanuel would be left standing alone near the driveway, just staring at their feet, being with each other, but were certainly not included with the other children. And at home, for home life, the discipline was much worse than anyone could have imagined. Hana had hepatitis B, which also infuriated Carri. Like this little girl had any control over that. But Carri accused her of purposefully smearing blood on the bathroom walls. And because of this, Hana was not allowed to use the bathroom in the house. She was only allowed to use an absolutely disgusting and filthy outdoor portable toilet behind the barn that was only serviced twice a year. So she was treated like an animal, worse than an animal. And even the indoor shower was off limits too, regardless of the weather, no matter what temperature. Hana's shower came from the garden hose, propped up with sticks in the front yard. Hana was often forced to use this cold makeshift shower while the other children watched her from the house. And God, that makes me so angry. When Hana would make any sort of complaint about the clothes that Carri had chosen for her to wear, she would lose her right to wear any clothes at all, and given only a towel to wear for the rest of the day. Hana had beautiful, long braided hair that she was very proud of. Her hair was like the one thing she felt like she could take a pride in, and Carri knew this. The first spring of Hana's new life, she was told to go cut grass in the yard. And when she finished, the grass was cut shorter than Carri had wanted it. And so, as punishment for this, Carri shaved her head. And this would not be the only time she shaved Hana's head. She would do it on 2 more occasions. The daily punishments that Hana had to endure had begun almost immediately after they were adopted. Most of the time, Emmanuel and Hana had no idea why they were being punished. It could have been for standing in the wrong place or getting an answer wrong on their schoolwork, but they really were never quite sure. A few months after arriving in the United States, absolutely traumatized by the change of environment and daily punishments, Emmanuel began wetting the bed, which is very common for traumatized children. Carri and Larry were convinced he was doing this on purpose just to anger them. The boy was taken outside and was given a shower with the cold hose, then sent to sleep in the dark shower room. If things weren't already terrible, Carri often teased him by running the plastic tubing that she called her switch up and down his face. On one occasion, Larry hit Emmanuel on the top of the head with his fist and caused blood to run down punishments themselves were often straight from that book, the To Train Up a Child book, and involved the beatings with a piece of plastic tubing, as mentioned earlier. Sometimes it was one of Larry's belts folded in half, or a long, flexible piece of glue stick. Other common forms of punishment that the Williams family adhered to from the book included denying food, denying clothes, forced outdoor sleeping, and cold outdoor showers, as mentioned earlier. The Williamses' biological children were punished as well, but it was never to the severity of Hana and Emmanuel. The adopted children were fed different meals than the biological children, so basically in every aspect, they were treated differently. When the biological children had sandwiches, Hana and Emmanuel would have the same sandwich, but with a glass of water poured all over it, and sometimes they would get cold leftovers with unheated frozen vegetables. Almost always, these two children were forced to eat outside, while the other children ate inside, regardless of the cold, rain, or snow. Now, back to this menstruation thing for a second. So because of that, Larry and Carri took the initial steps to change her official age. Carri told her knitting group that if they could get her age bumped up a few years, they could kick her out of the house sooner. So they wanted to make her older, so she was just a few years shy of 18. When another member of the knitting group had asked how the girl would survive in the outside world, Carri said, "It wouldn't be my problem." In the 3 years that Hana lived with the Williamses, she went from sleeping alone in the barn behind the house to being locked inside a bathroom with no light to eventually being kept in a 4-foot by 2-foot closet for up to 24 hours at a time. Larry's recorded Bible sermons and religious music played outside of the closet the entire time, which one is creepy as hell to me, and two, it really messed with Hana's head and deprived her of sleep. In the afternoon of Wednesday, May 11th of 2011, Carri sent Hana into the backyard as one of her daily punishments. It was a rainy spring day, and the temperature was in the mid-40s, a very typical Washington day. When Hana, only wearing shorts and a t-shirt, complained that she was cold, Carri commanded that she do jumping jacks in the yard to stay warm. After a few hours alone outside, the children noticed Hana's lower lip began quivering. She seemed unable to control her movements. She had fallen a few times and eventually had trouble standing up at all. Carri went out the back door of the home and grabbed Hana by the arm and led her to the outhouse behind the barn. When Hana was trying to get over to the outhouse, she fell repeatedly because she was not in a good condition. But this only infuriated Carri more. She believed Hana was only trying to create attention. But unable to get her to stand, Carri left her lying alone in the yard. Hours later, Hana's clothes were just soaked. Carri set dry clothes on the back porch and boys go out there to do this, which, I mean, that's horrible. But I guess I can see why it happened. I'm not justifying it. But when they live with such a tyrant of a mother, it's not surprising that they listened to her orders and followed suit with such a terrible act. When the boys were whipping her, she started to remove her own clothing, and Carri called the boys back inside. By 5 o'clock p.m., Hana began throwing herself down on the pavement, gravel driveway, and grass. Her knees and hands began to bloody as Carri watched from the inside house. When she couldn't watch anymore, Carri turned away from the window and just ignored Hana for the rest of the evening. Near midnight, the 7 biological Williams' children giggled as they continued to stare out the window at Hana, who had removed all of her clothing and was still just uncontrollably throwing her body around in a fit. So this was 7 hours ongoing of this behavior at this point. She was wallowing in the mud and pounding her head into the ground. They watched Hana in amusement, and what she was experiencing was known as paradoxical undressing. In the final stages of this, it turned out that this was all related to hypothermia. The nerves become so damaged that it causes irrational behavior, which is what Hana was experiencing. In the final stage of hypothermia, it tricks the mind into thinking that it's actually extremely hot, causing the person to remove the clothes and attempt to burrow themselves into the ground to dry and cool down. When Hana finally stopped moving, one of the daughters called their mother to come check on Hana. She was face down in the yard with a mouth full of mud. Carri, again, just upset with Hana, thinking that she's a little awful child, looking for attention, throwing a temper tantrum. She grabs a bedsheet and wraps it around Hana and instructs her sons to drag Hana into the house. First, Carri calls Larry, who was driving home from work, and then when she hung up, she finally calls 911. And this is a quote from the 911 call. "I think my daughter just killed herself. She's really rebellious, and she's been outside refusing to come in. And she's been throwing herself all around, and then she collapsed." The dispatcher asks, "Is she breathing?" And Carri says, "I don't think so, no." The dispatcher asks, "How old is your daughter?" Carri says, "I don't know. We adopted her almost 3 years ago." And the dispatcher says, "You don't know how old she is." And Carri replies, "She is somewhere between the ages of 14 and 16. She was throwing herself all over the gravel, the yard, and the patio. We went to bring her in. My sons tried to carry her in, and she took her clothes off. She is very passive-aggressive. I don't know how to describe it." During this call, Carri sounded more annoyed than she was sad. The 911 operator coached Carri through CPR, but it was no use. Hana was gone. When emergency crews arrived at their home, Hana had a large lump on her forehead, and she was covered in and face had fresh red bloody markings from repeated whippings. The post-mortem examination of Hana's body revealed she was abnormally thin for just 13 years old. At only 5 feet tall, she was emaciated and had gone back down to the weight that she was when she left Ethiopia, around 77 pounds. She was lighter than 97% of girls her age and thinner than she was when she came from Ethiopia. According to the coroner and medical examiner, the cause of death was hypothermia compounded by malnutrition and gastritis, which is a stomach infection. It was determined that her body had been too thin to retain enough heat on the day that she died. So now, Child Protective Services get involved. When Child Protective Services knocked on the door of the Williams home the following day, Larry refuses to let them in. 2 weeks after her death, the entire family were interviewed by detectives and Child Protective Services. All of the children in the family gave the same story, which they were totally coached by their parents. And because they were such a religious family, they claimed that Hana was possessed by demons. But when Emmanuel was interviewed, he told detectives people like Hana got spankings for lying and going to the fires of hell. When Larry heard Emmanuel give that answer, he immediately stopped the interview and took the children home. 2 months go by and there are 0 charges brought against the Williamses, but Child Protective Services ends up receiving an anonymous tip. Somebody claimed that Carri didn't like her adopted children, and Emmanuel was being treated much like Hana. So with that news, CPS worked with detectives and opened a formal investigation. It's insane to me that there was not a formal investigation at this point. Like, I don't even know how that's possible, but that is what happened. All 8 of the Williams children were taken into foster care at this time. And when police were searching the house, they found a copy of that book, To Train Up a Child, which gives some insight into what they believed and why Hana was in the condition she was. Even after months in foster care, Emmanuel was afraid of his foster parents and nervously apologized for every little mistake he made. And this is so sad to me. So Emmanuel was removed from the Williams' home and put in a new home, okay, with his foster parents. He would literally ask his foster mother why she wasn't beating him. He genuinely thought that that was normal and didn't get why she didn't beat him. Like, can you even imagine? Oh my god, it breaks my heart. He, in this process, had to see therapists and be in therapy, which is good. And he told them of repeated nightmares and that he was constantly worried that he would be dead soon. Understandably so, Emmanuel ended up being diagnosed with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder from the atrocities that he endured. So 4 months after Hana's death, Carri and Larry Williams were arrested on other sets of fundamental Christian parents that employed tactics from the book had also killed their children. The 3 deaths happened in different parts of the United States, but all of these children were adopted, homeschooled, and beaten with the length of a 1/4-inch plastic tubing, as recommended by the author Michael Burrow. One of these children was Lydia Schatz. Her parents, Kevin and Elizabeth, held her down and beat her for 9 hours with a piece of tubing for pronouncing the word pulled incorrectly. And the other child was 4-year-old Sean Paddock, and his mother, Lynn Paddock, smothered him in a blanket wrapped too tightly around him because she wanted to stop him from getting out of bed in the middle of the night. My heart just breaks for these 3 sweet, innocent children. I don't understand how parents, just humans, period, could inflict such pain on children. I don't understand. Okay, so let's talk about trial. At the trial, Carri and Larry end up turning on each other. They sat at opposite tables in their courtroom, rarely looking each other in the eye. Larry ends up testifying that the discipline was all Carri's idea, while she testified that this discipline was at the instruction of her husband, and she was just being a dutiful, godly wife and doing what he told her. Carri did admit that she told her children not to talk to detectives about any of the abuse. The children, however, testified that lying was considered one of the most serious offenses in their household. One of the children, Joshua, confirmed that Hana had not been homeschooled or eaten meals with the other children for at least a year before her death. The child told the court that she would sometimes go 2 days without anyone speaking to her, and none of the biological children liked her. But he said that even though they didn't like her, it didn't actually matter because their parents forced her into a closet so they didn't have to interact with her. This part actually makes me so emotional when I think about it, and it's okay. So her adopted brother Emmanuel ends up testifying at trial, and because he is deaf, again, as I mentioned earlier, he uses sign language to communicate. So this little boy in trial testifies using sign language only, and there are 3 interpreters there interpreting for the court what it is that he's saying, and it's just that visual for me of this terrified little boy who has saw atrocities, who has experienced them, who is diagnosed with PTSD, is brave enough to sit in a courtroom and use sign language to speak his truth. Like, that to me is so powerful, and one of the most, like, it stands out so much to me in this story. I just can't get over that. The courtroom was silent as he was asked what he thought happened to Hana. He signs that he doesn't know, but that he thinks she's dead. And I think a couple things are at play here. I think he was so afraid to tell the truth of what he saw. And I think he also wanted to tell the truth because he does tell the court that he himself was beaten with a stick or this plastic tubing sad. It really just breaks my heart. He told the court that he would suffer with the pain until it just eventually went away. The biological children admitted that they were coached to tell authorities that Hana slept in the bedroom with them, when in fact she slept in this tiny locked closet. The jury was shown the closet that she slept in and were shown photos of the scars on Hana's body from the repeated beatings. Larry testified that he trusted his wife's discipline choices at the time with the adopted children because she had done such a good job raising their biological children. But he basically says that he was wrong in believing that she was capable of raising these adopted children. She rebutted that her husband was an equal participant in this discipline and even came up with some methods of his own, like hosing off Emmanuel and locking him in the shower room after his bedwetting episodes. She also testified that Larry was the one that installed the lock on the closet door, not letting them out. The defense during the trial attempted to argue that Hana was actually 16 years old rather than 13. And if she had been 16 by the time of her death, the homicide by abuse charge could not be applied, as it only applies to children younger than 16. And since there was no documentation of birth from Ethiopia that proved her age either way, the trial was actually postponed in order to have Hana's body exhumed for examination. They ended up testing her teeth and bones, but it was actually found inconclusive, and experts could not confirm that she was 16. The defense agreed that Larry and Carri may have been bad parents and their choices were bad, but they weren't killers and had no idea that their form of discipline would lead to the child's death. After 7 weeks of testimony, the jury did not agree with the defense, and both Larry and Carri Williams were convicted of first-degree manslaughter and first-degree assault. Carri was also found guilty of homicide by abuse and was sentenced to 37 years in prison. Larry Williams was sentenced to nearly 28 years and given credit for the almost 2 years he had been in jail awaiting trial. My heart absolutely breaks for Hana and the other 2 children, Lydia Schatz and Sean Paddock, for the abuse